noticed that I just like when the craving to drink came upon me, it was the same intensity as it had always been. And I'm struggling to find things to do now that I'm sober, and that was all I ever did with my friends, so I didn't know what, so I'm trying to go to like a baseball game, and that's like the biggest trigger ever for me, apparently. And it was just overwhelming, the intensity of these cravings. They would pass. It wouldn't be, maybe even every day after 15 months of sobriety, but it was really intense. So one day I started poking around on the internet, and I came across the Sinclair Method, and it sounded too good to be true.
Hey, Scott. Scott, I just want to thank you so much for taking time to share your TSM success story with us all.
My pleasure. Can't wait.
Awesome. Well, I just want to jump right in. I know a bit about your story, but I'm excited to learn more. So, kind of where I like to start with everyone is, in the beginning. Can you tell us a bit about, your drinking before you came to the Sinclair Method and, just your history with that in general and kind of what it is that brought you to TSM?
Sure. I mean, I started, the first time I ever had a drink was probably at a friend's place, and they were like, I think it was their mission to get me drunk, which they succeeded at, and I passed out like within an hour. Um, but I wrote it off like, oh, I'm new. They just, they're just trying to get me drunk. And, you know, it seemed like I always just had too much. I didn't start out drinking often at all. I was a good kid in high school. When I went to college, I drank on the weekends. But I didn't quite grasp how like consistently I overdrank until much later. Eventually I switched to just using marijuana and got really addicted to that. And, at the time I thought, oh, like alcohol sort of acted as a gateway to that. But it was really, I was just trying to escape the alcohol that I knew I couldn't control. And it really took a long time to figure that out. Um, and so, after several years of just being really addicted to marijuana, it wasn't really doing the job. I was kind of just like being a shut-in pothead, and I needed to go out and see the world and, meet girls and whatnot. And so alcohol came roaring back into my life. And it was just, it was sort of a slow burn. I started off with like a couple days a week, 3 days a week, 4 days a week. Um, but I thought every time I got hammered drunk and was super hungover the next day that I was okay because I didn't drink the next day because I was so hungover. But it came to the point where I ended up getting two DUIs. Um, and my second DUI was about 11 years ago. While my wife was pregnant with my first kid, and we'd just gotten married. And so then I knew I had a problem. Um, Finally, I was still had not hit rock bottom. But I did go to AA after my second DUI, and these guys were very serious. I mean, they were really hammering home this method of 90 meetings in 90 days. And it just seemed too much for me. I had no car because of the DUI. I also totaled my car. Luckily, I didn't hit anybody. I just happened to flip it over on an off ramp and walked away
Oh my
pretty,
gosh, you are so
pretty safe.
lucky.
Yeah. And so I had no license. I had a newborn. I had a wife with postpartum. I can't go to 90 meetings in 90 days, guys. And they were very serious about that. So, eventually I just stopped going. I knew I had a problem, but I still didn't think I was an alcoholic because I didn't drink in the morning. I usually took a day off after getting drunk, and I knew I had a problem. I just wasn't ready to say I was an alcoholic. Um, but slowly went back to drinking more and more and more, and just blacking out constantly, and getting close to almost a third DUI was kind of like my rock bottom. And then I went into AA, and I liked it. I was able to, from the day I went into AA, I started my sobriety, and I did everything I was supposed to, except they still were on me all the time about not doing enough meetings. I probably went to 3 a week. Um, and my sponsor was constantly harassing me about going to more and telling me I wasn't doing things enough right. And so I did that for 15 months, stayed sober the entire time. It was really hard. Learned a lot, but I noticed that I just, like, when the craving to drink came upon me, it was the same intensity as it had always been. And I'm struggling to find things to do now that I'm sober, and that was all I ever did with my friends, so I didn't know so I'm trying to go to like a baseball game, and that's like the biggest trigger ever for me, apparently. And it was just overwhelming, the intensity of these cravings. They would pass. It wouldn't be, maybe even every day after 15 months of sobriety, but it was really intense. So one day I started poking around on the internet, and I came across the Sinclair Method, and it sounded too good to be true. And I was pretty sure it was bullshit. And I just kept reading and reading and reading about it. Um, I read all the scientific papers. I spent a whole week just trying to find science that would disprove the Sinclair Method. And I was reading the entire scientific studies that were out there, and every single one of them, I found that everything against the Sinclair Method was a flawed study, because they demanded the people in the double blind study take naltrexone every single morning, which is not at all how the Sinclair Method works. And so I had a hell of a time convincing my family and friends and social worker that I was going to try this, when I finally decided that the numbers were the numbers, and that the numbers were legit, and that, I a 77% chance with the Sinclair Method was a lot better than the 70% chance of me relapsing in AA, generally speaking, at that point in my sobriety. And, you know, I did it and never looked back. I mean, I remember my first time trying it, I only had 3 or 4 beers. Um, I even didn't finish my midnight drunken like meal I had. I don't know what I was eating, something stupid like an omelet or something. I don't know, or pancakes, in the middle of the night, and I didn't even finish it. I mean, it was a little bit of a bumpy path, but within 3 or 4 months, I was sober.
So, okay, just to back up a little bit so I understand your story. So you were in and out of AA, but the last time you committed to it, you were in it for 15 or sober for 15 months. Did you go straight from AA to TSM?
I did.
Okay.
I just, I did it extremely carefully, with as much support as I could get around me. Um, and read and just made sure I knew it backwards and forwards, I think, because it was scary, and there weren't even doctors around to be able to prescribe it to me. I mean, I finally found one, and he was amazing.
Well,
But yeah.
yeah, and I appreciate you kind of telling that part of your story because I do get people asking often, I'm in AA, I'm 8 months sober, 12 months sober, 2 years sober, but like I really want to drink. Like you described, that craving is so incessant and they just want to get rid of that because, I've heard people say they're alcohol free, but they're not free from the alcohol. So it sounds like I think you approached it in a way, and kind of like the way I advise people is like, take this seriously. It's a treatment. Make sure you want to do it because you don't want to compromise your sobriety and go back to where you were if you're not like viewing it as a treatment and like a way to ultimately fix this problem. But it sounds like you approached it like with a very, for lack of a better word, like sober mind, where you really thought about it, you dug into the research, you talked to your support system around you, and then you're like, okay, I'm going to do this. Am I hearing you correctly?
Yeah, that's generally how it went, you know. Yeah. I mean, it was amazing. I mean, it's been a miracle. And I didn't go into it trying to even become alcohol free permanently. It just happened naturally. And it wasn't a straight path, but you know, I just kept doing my drink log and noticing the trends going in the right direction and stuck with it. And it's been a godsend.
Yeah. And it's so interesting to me to hear that you went alcohol free somewhat accidentally in only 3 or 4 months. I mean, that's a very quick response to the medication. And if someone's kind of pushing back when I'm talking about TSM, if they're from AA or other places, they'll say, well, this isn't for like real alcoholics, or this isn't for people who have like a serious drinking problem. But I would say that yours was pretty serious. Like you were battling this for a while, and not only did you succeed with TSM, but you succeeded really quickly. Like, what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I would say to those people that they've got it completely backwards. I mean, I think if anything, it would be more successful with real quote unquote alcoholics. The people who try it that aren't actually real alcoholics may not be committed enough to actually stick with it. Um, and that was always the thing that worried me the most. I was like, if I'm so obviously and surely an alcoholic, like, why won't I try to cheat on this system? I was just like, it doesn't make sense. Like, I'll just not take the pill because I want that exact old, experience I had before I started this program. And it never was a problem. There were times where I drank too much during, my initial phases of using the Sinclair method, which really freaked me out. But I eventually just could see the trends on the drink chart. Oh, here's the cat again. I could see the trends on the drink chart going in the right direction. I mean, the way I describe why I think that's the hardest thing when I explain it to people is they're like, why wouldn't you just cheat? I mean, you're telling me it's not quite the same feeling as before. It's not quite as fun as before or pleasurable because you're on the naltrexone. And the way I describe it to them is a little weird. I say, you've got basically this alcoholic demon, let's call it a disease, right, inside your brain. And to me, I personified it as like a little gremlin or a little monster, and his only goal in life is to get me to drink. And then he's in charge. He knows he's in charge. And I try and fight him, and I lose. And he says, "Just have one drink. Just have one drink," and it turns into 20. But when I present him with the Sinclair method, all he hears is, "You mean I get to have a drink? Like, where do I sign?" And so he signs the paperwork, and he thinks he's in charge like he always has been. And really, he's actually shrinking until he finally disappeared. And it's incredible.
Well, to be honest, I've never heard anyone describe it in that way, and I think it's so brilliant, and I completely relate to how it was for me as well. Like that part of my brain was just stoked that I could keep drinking. Like, so what? I have to take this pill beforehand. I get to have my cake and eat it too, so to speak. And I know, of course, people do struggle with compliance because they do miss that euphoric buzz, and so that is an issue for some people, but it was true for my experience as well, how you describe it. And I think that gives people a seed of hope, because I think hearing you talk, like you were really committed to this, you really wanted it. And I think that burning desire when we're a 10 out of 10, like I want this change and I'm gonna commit to it. I think that's half the battle with TSM, is just being committed and being ready for this change, because it's a pretty significant change, even though we're just taking a pill before we drink. So I think that is kind of what helps with the compliance piece, is that commitment to it. And I was curious, like if you wanted to talk to about that, like your personal experience and your desire, for success on this method. Were you like 10 out of 10 completely committed and ready for this? Or how did you feel when you were starting on the treatment?
Oh, yeah, I was 100% committed because I knew how I felt after a year of sobriety in AA, and it was so hard. And it was still, I wanted a way out of it. I didn't want to go to 3, 4 meetings a week for the rest of my life, even though I enjoyed the meetings. And I usually felt great after going to a meeting. It's a time consuming thing. And I'm kind of the primary parent, for my kid. And he had a lot of issues. I had to be there for him. And and then I'm constantly getting whacked with these intense cravings. So I, I had a very strong desire to commit, and I wanted to prove the doubters wrong because everybody doubted it. Nobody believed that this could work, and I didn't have anybody except some people I found on Facebook to back me up. But yeah, I couldn't be more happy and thrilled with how it all worked out.
That's
And
awesome.
I've got a pill on my keychain. I've got the same pill on my keychain that's it's been there for 3 years, and I have never even thought about it. Um, I mean, I'm a bartender. I'm around it all day long, actually, and I don't know what to tell you. It's just not an issue anymore. It's Naltrexone kind of slows down the whole freight train, the runaway train that is alcoholism. It even the first pill you take, it just slows down the process a little more. And then when I was having sober days, the feelings, honestly, the negative feelings that I should have been having when I looked back at my mistakes and my drinking problem were there to remind me not to drink again, or at least to work on it with the method while I was in the middle of, taking it. And so now I do, I mean, I'm around alcohol all the time and occasionally a little, it's not even a strong urge, but it's an urge. And then I think about it for 2 seconds and I feel, how I just, it was like before I couldn't hold in my heart the feelings the negative feelings about drinking. And like I knew it was horrible for me, but all the negative feelings were being countered by the positives that I felt where alcohol was giving me. And now I have a very just sober, clear view of what the positives and the negatives were, and I can feel that. And it's been easy, you know. I mean, I think like everybody, I struggle with the whole mindfulness all the time and surrounding myself with the right social connections and the right positive activities that I need to do. I don't always do great at that. Um, but I think everybody's like that a little bit, and it's just been amazing.
Yeah, it's like the voice, that craving voice, the demon or whatever, it just quiets down to the point where sure, you might still think like, "Oh, I could drink right now," or, that thought can come up, but it's not, for me at least, it's not this overwhelming urge. It's something that I can kind of just observe and be like, "Nah, I don't really feel like it." And it hasn't been strong enough for me to act on it in 5 years. In fact, I just like it doesn't even occur to me anymore. Like you, I keep naltrexone just in case, but the desire is like permanently gone, or that craving is permanently gone, which is so freeing.
The only time I even refilled my prescription was when I was on vacation and I left it at home. Um, so I still have that
Well,
prescription, and
wow.
it's been incredible.
So you haven't drank in 3 years, right? So you started the method a little over 3 years ago?
No, well, yeah, it was about 4 years ago, and
Okay.
so it's been over 3.5 years
Wow.
that I've been sober completely. And like I said, it was 3 or 4 months on the, you know, where I was taking naltrexone and drinking.
And I'm curious to hear, because people watching like are always interested to know like how much were you drinking? I know you were in AA before the method, but before that, like
Yeah,
what was your drinking like a week in the life, if you will?
sure. It would start as early as I could manage, like 5 o'clock or after work. I got out of work kind of late. Um, and I would always, try to start out drinking slowly, managing it, and then it would just accelerate like every single time. So by the end of the night, I was drinking more and more. I mean, originally I was just beer. Um, then I got into more of the heavier, craftier, higher alcoholic beers. Then I got into some liquor. But I could I could get blackout drunk on light beer. I would just I would just drink to that point. So, like I said, yeah, it was only maybe 3 or 4 days a week, which I thought meant I wasn't an alcoholic. But of course I was because I never kept to the limit I set for myself. The blackouts got more and more frequent and more dangerous. And so that was it. I would be up till 3, 4 in the morning drinking, shutting down bars, coming home, drinking more,
Wow.
and then, rinse and repeat 2 days later.
Yep.
I wouldn't say, I mean, there definitely were consecutive days where I did drink. Then that, yeah, and at the end there actually were some day drinking and stuff like that, drinking while I'm watching my kid and everything like that. It was pretty bad.
Yeah. And it's crazy that you are still a bartender and you're able to work that job without any temptation or issue. Can you talk about what that's been like? Because I assume you were a
Yeah.
bartender before TSM, right?
Yeah, I've been at the same bar for 16 years.
Wow.
Um, it's not your typical bar, it's a golf club. So I get a really interesting mix of golfers. There's a hotel there. I get international travelers. I get a lot of people where they're actually not showing up at the bar because they love drinking, so much. It's maybe they're just killing time or they're having lunch or something like that. And it's a pretty good group of customers that I have that are pretty responsible drinkers, which always baffles me. Um, and a couple of them seem to be highly functioning alcoholics. I mean, as far as their life goes, although I suspect that their relationships at home are a mess. But I describe it kind of like if I worked at McDonald's for 15 years, maybe the smell of the fries just disgusts me after 15 years, as opposed to obviously being the greatest smelling thing in the world right now. It's I don't know. I mean, it's incredible. It was harder when I was in AA, that's for sure. Um, but now I don't know what to say. It's just it's not a problem, you
Yeah.
know. I mean, I don't. It's not like a passion of mine to bartend. I just kind of ended up there, and so it's nice. I have customers that I've been friends with for 15 years, and we go golfing together and stuff like that. And it's great that I get to still see them without being distracted by horrible cravings.
Yeah. Yeah, and just to go back a little bit, thank you for speaking to that. You said with your first naltrexone, like you noticed it working right away, like you couldn't finish more than a few beers, and even your food you couldn't finish. So, what was your progress like on the method? Like, did you just feel like naltrexone continued to work each time you took it? Did your drinks just steadily go down? Like, can you talk more about what
No,
your journey was like?
it was still scary. I mean, I had some days where I drank over drank, and I'm a stubborn person and I'm an alcoholic, and I just drank past it and got just about blackout drunk. And I was contacting the people, like Claudia Christensen and people in the Facebook group, to be like, I mean, I can't be getting blackout drunk while I'm taking naltrexone, and they just told me to stick with it. And when I just took a step back and looked at the month's progress, it was going down overall, and it always was. You might seem like you're having a bad week, because there's a big spike when you drink too much one time. But I would say even those days where I'd overdrank on naltrexone, it was still not quite as bad. It was still safer because I wasn't drinking at this quite as high of a rate as I was before.
Yeah.
But it was very scary. I mean, you blackout drunk is a dangerous place to get to. So I definitely had my doubts. But for me, it was all about the science, and I found the drink log really helpful because I could just see the trend month
Exactly.
over month, week over week.
Yeah. Yeah, and I'm glad you mentioned that because I see that happen for people. I even talked to a client about this recently where they were saying like if I didn't know that this was like a long-term treatment protocol that it needs time to work, I might have given up by now because they were like 6 or 8 weeks in and seen a little progress, but like you, still having those over drinking days and just wondering, is this working? And that's just
Yeah.
like the most maybe annoying advice people can get. Like, just stick with it. But it's also the most practical because it really does need time to work. The medication works better and better the longer someone continues to use it correctly. So, time is our friend with TSM, that's for sure.
Yeah, and I mean, there's always going to be a tendency when you're just giving people a pill that's going to help them like this, that they're gonna get cocky, like I did after my first two times taking it, and think they've got this pretty much whipped. You're gonna get complacent, and there's gonna be times where you think I'm just gonna let the pill do all the work, and I don't have to be mindful, and I don't have to do anything. I'm tired of that, and then you can get into trouble, and the program won't work if you don't do the whole program.
Yeah. So, how were you mindful, or what was your approach to kind of changing habits or correcting course when you would overdrink on the pill? Like, are there things you can recall that helped you, change the habits and behaviors linked to your drinking other than just the pill?
I mean, it was just such a it was just such a relief. Like I lived in terror of these blackouts,
Yeah.
and I felt like I was getting my life back. Um, as far as the mindfulness, I definitely would take a beat. I would almost meditate. I would take like a 5 minute break. I would drink water in between drinks a lot.
Yeah.
Um, and I'd try to really enjoy those alcohol free days and do something, that was pleasurable, enjoyable. And I think the I think a lot of people screw up the whole alcohol free day thing. They just think that the pill's going to work for them magically, and you still have to you have to do something. You have to be like, I don't think I want to drink tonight. Exert a little willpower here
Yeah.
and there.
Yeah.
Without going full board dry or whatever. But I don't know. That for me, does that answer your question?
Yeah, no, it does. Like those simple things that I think seem like insignificant, but just like you said, like having waters between drinks or just taking some time and space to like pause and not just automatically reach for the drink. It's like those things that seem insignificant in the moment are really what add up over time and help the behavior shift because we're just on autopilot with the way that we drink, many of us. And so even if we just do one little thing different, like the water between. It's like those things that can help us like feel the effects of the naltrexone more, maybe drink more slowly, maybe drink less. So, obviously those things helped you in addition to the naltrexone.
Yeah, I mean, it was almost just like a mini meditation I would try to do once in a while, just to pause. Let's just not drink anything for 5 minutes, even water.
Yeah.
Is that so hard to do, Scott? No, you do it.
Yeah.
And then little things like that all the time really just allow the naltrexone to run its course for you
Yeah.
and keep you on the right path.
And something that's coming up for me that I noticed helped me accidentally on the method was if I took like a 30-minute break, which might seem like a lot, but I remember I would be out at a bar with friends and planning to go home and like open up the bottle of wine and keep the party going. But by the time
Yeah.
I would get home, I wouldn't want to drink anymore. And I started to notice this pattern with naltrexone. I was like, okay, so like if I have a few drinks and then kind of pause for 30 minutes, that desire fades away into the background. And I've suggested this to clients and people in the past, and they've noticed the same thing. So I really do think even just taking a break, even if you start for 5 minutes, but I would just notice consistently that even if I left the bar really wanting to drink, just in the time it took me to get home, be like, oh, I don't really feel like it anymore. And that was really, I think something that I could have easily ignored and just kept drinking if I followed that like habit and pattern that I normally did. But it was something that I noticed only through really paying attention and asking myself, do I want to drink right now? Or where is my craving level? Should I have water first? Or things like that. It really does make a difference on the method.
Yeah, and in the end, you just felt like there was these mental habits to grab a drink, but
Exactly.
you did not have the desire. So why not think about that for 1 second and see if you can just put a little pause on it and tell yourself, yeah, you can have another drink. Let's just do a pause, and then
Yeah.
you can have another one.
Yeah, and
You
I
know?
I often hear people say, and maybe you've seen this as well from people, I don't know, but they'll say, I notice that I don't want to drink, that craving and desire isn't there, but I'm drinking anyway. Like, what is happening there? And I think that's the
Hmm.
habit at play. Did you notice that on your journey at all?
Oh yeah, absolutely. I mean, especially if I was in a social situation.
Yeah.
Like I really, I don't know. Sometimes I think even it's harder in the social situations for guys. Like I just didn't feel equipped, or like my alcoholic guy friends weren't equipped to like really connect without alcohol, right?
Yeah.
Or do or what? I was like, I don't understand. There's just we just watch sports and drink, or and that's kind of what we did.
Yeah.
We played maybe some of them I would play video games with, and but it was it was like I didn't know what to do with myself. Um,
Exactly.
so yeah, you find yourself doing that
Yeah.
habitual drinking, but if you pay attention, it's just the urge isn't there like it used to be, and it's controllable.
Yeah, and the real challenge comes in and when you recognize, oh, I don't want to drink, it's like, okay, now what else am I gonna do? Because the easy choice is to default back to the normal drinking behavior, but then there's like, oh, like, well, shoot, now what? And that can be terrifying sometimes because it's such our habits are comfortable, even if they're harming us, like they're familiar, they're comfy. So it's difficult to change habits. And I think we have to honor that with this method, especially with alcohol, where it's such a complex, rewarding substance that almost becomes like a destructive best friend in a way. At least that's how I felt about it.
Sure. And I mean, the alcohol-free days after I did drink on the pill were great. I didn't have the shame that I had before because I blacked out the night before.
Yeah. Yeah.
It was just everything was easier.
And that's healing in and of itself when you just start to see, like you were saying, you were terrified of the blackouts and you started to see yourself kind of regain control over alcohol and live a different life. That is so rewarding and it can be motivating in and of itself to, cut back or be more mindful so that you can cut back with the use of naltrexone.
Yeah,
Um,
I tried to also just be more positive towards myself. I mean, I had a very negative internal dialogue almost my whole
uh,
life, and AA didn't always help with that. I mean, they can be pretty rough, and I think they do that out of necessity. I think that they have to build up almost like, I mean, I felt like that you had to have incredibly solid character and virtue in AA in order to defeat this alcoholic beast within you. And I think that's true if you're trying to just do it that way. So
yeah.
I would look around at these people and I'd be like, these are better people than the drinker. I mean, these are better people than even the sober people out in the world who haven't been
Yeah.
there, because you're working so hard on yourself. But they did have a tendency to just sometimes, trash your alcoholic character and be like, you're a
Yeah.
degenerate alcoholic, so we need you to be extra honest going forward. And and so I just for the first time I could really just look back over the past few days and pat myself on the back, you know, and that was important too. But I had a great support system with my wife and my social worker, and it just all worked out great.
Yeah, and you brought up such an important point about the thought life that we have when we're stuck in alcohol addiction. And I think that can be ignored sometimes. And it's our thoughts that ultimately create our beliefs we have and then drive our actions that we're taking. And so if we're just beating ourselves up all of the time and being so mean to ourselves, that's going to make us want to drink. And in and of like that process in and of itself. And I remember noticing that when I would make mistakes on TSM, I started to notice that my automatic thought was like, what's wrong with you? Like, you're such a failure. Why didn't you do better? And just these nasty thoughts and things I would say to myself. And I started noticing them and was like, man, I am so mean to myself. And it helped me to, because we choose what we think, as you're probably aware. And so I could start interrupting it and choosing to think something else. But those thoughts can be so destructive and cause shame and guilt and even just drive the drinking more. I feel like if I would have been in an AA program where they were talking to me that way, not to knock AA, but I feel like it would have made my drinking worse or make me want to drink. I don't know. That's just hypothetically what I think could have happened. But um, yeah, that's an important part of this process, I think, is noticing how we're talking to ourselves.
For sure.
I was curious to hear, you said you had a good support system like with your wife and your social worker. Did you tell your friends in AA or your sponsor in AA you were doing this, or how did you kind of depart from the program, or did you just because oftentimes it's a challenge people have, they're like, do I tell them? Do I not? Do I stick in AA? Do I not if they're transitioning to TSM? What was that like for you?
Yeah, so I told my sponsor, um, I didn't tell him like after I was doing it for 2 weeks. I told him right when I was about to do it, or maybe even before that. I might have said I'm thinking about doing that, and I said, so what? Where do we go now? Can I still go to meetings? And he was like, no. I mean, I'm not sure he was a great sponsor, but he was very serious about it and very sober. And I have gone, so I stopped going. But I mean, I did start going back, um, just because it's still helpful,
Yeah.
you know. But it was, I just want. It was hard to go back in the sense that I just wanted to evangelize the Sinclair method. I wanted to tell these people, and they're not going to be okay with that. The people running the meetings.
Yeah.
But it's too bad because I learned a lot of great things from them. Like I learned that besides having a high chance of relapsing when you're working the program in AA, your relapse will be worse than before you quit the first time. And that was the first thing when I studied the experiments that Sinclair was doing. That was the first thing that he noticed with the rats was that when he reintroduced alcohol after depriving them for months, they were drinking 15 times as much as they were on the last day that they had the alcohol.
Yeah.
And so I don't, it's a little odd. I really owe a lot to AA. I mean, they helped convince me that this was a disease. I thought it was like, yeah, obesity is a disease too. This is baloney. But it is. It's like a disease you kind of gave yourself by some risky behavior. It's a disease that you had a genetic predisposition towards, maybe, like I think I did. And regardless of, what a disease is, by the time I'd been drinking for all those years, and I had these pathways in my brain that were set, and it was, and I knew so. I mean, I really, I still carry along a lot of good information I got from AA, and I still occasionally go, but not really very much.
Yeah, I mean, like I have heard people who get really good things out of AA. I'm curious about the 12-step work myself. I think it's a really perhaps helpful path for some people for more personal development and kind of, the stages we go through as we change our drinking. So, um, yeah, I think AA is an awesome program for the people it, works for. Um, it's it's too bad that because I've just heard over and over again when people try to stay in AA with TSM, they typically don't allow them, unfortunately. But like you said, it depends on the sponsor and the group, I'm sure. But I'm glad it's helped you, and I'm also glad that you found TSM. And how did you find it, by the way? Was it Claudia's TEDx talk?
No, I think I literally just Google searched alternatives to AA.
Okay.
I'd actually tried an alternative before I went into AA called I think it was called Smart
Oh yeah,
Program or
smart
something like
recovery.
that.
Yeah.
I did try that right before I went serious with AA, and I didn't like it. They gave me a big workbook and it was all science based. That seemed great, but the person running the meetings was like an overworked nurse who kept running out of the room to give methadone to heroin addicts in her clinic. And I'm sitting next to a sex addict, and I'm sitting across from some heroin addict that thinks he's better than me because he quit heroin. And I've got this nurse who, she knows a lot of science, but she doesn't really know how to run this meeting. And so I was like, this isn't going to work. And I ended up in AA. I'm sorry, what was the question?
Just how you learned about it.
Yeah. So then I went to AA for 15 months, and then I just started Google searching alternatives,
Okay.
and I came across this. And I just couldn't believe it because I was like, if this is so effective, how come they're not using it? It doesn't make any sense. If they're 77% effective or 78, whatever it is, and it's as simple as they say it is, there's just no way it's legit. But then you come to realize that, well, AA is an American invention. This is ground zero for AA, and it's very counter. Sinclair Method is incredibly counterintuitive. And who's going to fund this double-blind study on a generic drug to try and give alcohol to alcoholics? It's just not like these rules, in the medical world are codified, and it is going to take a long time to change them.
Yeah.
And which is why, I mean, that's why Sinclair, I think, even didn't he leave the country and go to Finland so that he
Yeah.
could he could do these programs, you know? So I was really amazed that it just wasn't, but I mean, you realize what a gigantic economic industry this is, like how much money goes into rehab facilities and just away from not even counting AA, just the amount of money that goes into it and what is their financial incentive to change any of that, you know? And so eventually I just kept studying and studying until I couldn't argue with the numbers anymore.
Yeah. Well, it's awesome you're so hungry, and even though you were like, this seems like too good to be true. I felt the same way. Like you pursued it, and I'm so glad that you found it and had such a rapid response to it. Um, as we kind of wrap up, I have a couple more questions. I'm curious if you want to share, like, what's your life like now, being alcohol free, reaching the extinction point, what has changed in your life since going on TSM and getting free? I know we kind of talked a bit about it, but just curious to hear more.
Um, I mean, so much. My relationships with my wife and my son have improved. I'm a better dad now. I'm happier. I'm less stressed out because I was constantly just putting out fires that I started when I was hammered.
Yeah.
Um, so there's a just a much greater sense of peace
Yeah.
in my life now. Um, and I still have my struggles, but it's just so much easier to deal with everything.
Mhm.
And it's just a sense of peace. Like, so there was so long where I knew I had a problem, and then I just drank and felt so guilty afterwards. And I don't know. It's just been incredible. You know, I could go on and on. I don't
Yeah.
know. It's
No,
been great.
yeah. I completely relate. Um, are there things you want to tell people who are watching, just based on your experience? Like, what would you want people to know if they're just learning about the method, or maybe they're still in the middle of it, or they're struggling? Like, what's your message for people out there who are watching this?
Um, well, obviously it really works. And I don't know. I've always been kind of, despite being a bartender, I'm pretty literate about science. That was always like my favorite subject. You know, I mean, alcoholism is probably the reason I ended up being a bartender and not something else, right? So the numbers don't lie. I mean, I spent a whole week every night just trying to find anybody on the internet in the entire world who could give me one shred of evidence that this method doesn't work.
Mhm.
And the only people I found were people that they had no real understanding at all of what the method was and could not wrap their head around the reverse Pavlovian science that is behind this. Even though
Yeah.
Pavlov practically invented modern psychology, and he used the reverse strategy to untrain the dogs to salivate
Yeah.
when the meat came, which is exactly what we're doing here.
Yep.
So it just seems too good to be true because you're in America, I think, because it's nobody. Nobody knows about it. I mean, I think I've been doing. I haven't really poked around on the internet lately. Hopefully, it's gaining traction. Hopefully, it's gaining steam. You know, um, but all of that stuff that you learn from the other programs, like the SMART program or AA, that's all fantastic information, and it will all help you.
Yeah.
It just isn't effective, isn't as effective by itself. And if you can incorporate that, if you can bring some of that in with you into the Sinclair method, you're going to have an incredible chance of success.
Yeah.
I mean, I can't, after I maybe there might be 10% of people out there that because of some sort of genetic way their bodies deal with the pill, it won't work for them,
Yeah.
and that's terrible. But the success rate is so high and it's so real. And I promise you, I did all the research. I read all the papers, and it's all legit.
Yeah. Yeah, I can tell
So
you're
stick with
very
your stick
learned
with
on
your.
it. Oh, go ahead. Sorry.
Yeah, no, I mean that's it was hard to throw away 15 months of sobriety in AA. It was really terrifying,
Yeah. I'm sure it was. Oh my gosh. Yeah.
you know. Um, and I guess there was a part of me that was like, hee hee, I get to drink again, and
Right.
I can always go back to AA if this doesn't work, you know. Um, but yeah, I also did a lot of research on AA, and I found yes, besides Sinclair, that AA is the best, but the numbers are so much worse.
Mm-hmm.
Their success rate is so low, and everybody in AA thinks the success rate is much higher because they see the same people at the meeting every day.
Yeah.
They go every week, they see the same people showing up every week, and they think, "Wow, this is working." Like the 10 people that come to this, and then one person comes in every week and then disappears. And then the next 2 weeks later, another couple people come in and then they disappear.
Yeah.
And so they have a flawed vision of the success rate. They don't see the 80% of people that went to AA and then left and just stayed drunk, you
Yeah.
know. They just see the people that go there and stick.
Yep. Exactly. And I see that too, because those when I get pushback from people just in my advocacy work on social media and stuff, it's typically from the AA people who are mad at me that I'm suggesting there's something else out there, and they really believe that that's the only way to do it. And it's a small number of people, but the voices are loud, and so it's just interesting for me to see that perspective of like, because even though I believe in TSM, I think it's an amazing treatment, but I would never believe it's like the only treatment out there. But there are people who really believe that like you won't get better unless you do AA. So that's been eye-opening for me to see that, and also helps me understand why they haven't embraced the Sinclair method, because it's totally goes against everything AA teaches, which that's fine. Like it can be one option and TSM can be another option, but we do need to spread the word more and more. I hope it's gaining traction as well.
Yeah. I mean, every doubt, they don't have any numbers to back up their position. And I do, is the way I
Yeah.
see it.
Yeah.
They really don't. AA doesn't keep track of their success rate at all. They say it's 50% if they're pushed, but they have no numbers to back anything up,
Hmm.
and nobody has any good numbers to back up. It's addiction is incredibly hard, and a lot of people fail to quit,
Yeah.
and I mean that's common knowledge. That's easy to find on the internet. Um, but yeah, it's to me it was definitely about the numbers were important because I didn't really have much else to go on. I didn't have a lot of people to talk to about it,
Yeah.
except a Facebook group.
Yeah, I feel like that data that's been shown in the research, it's like something objective that we can ground into that's been proven over and over again. And for me, that was what gave me my confidence that this is going to work. Like I'm willing to commit to it and I believe it's going to work. But I think like when it doesn't work for people, like you mentioned, like whether they have something physiologically that causes it not to work, or they struggle with compliance, or like they may just not be ready to change yet. Like as a coach, the last 5 years, I've seen that where like the example I said where people say I don't have the desire to drink but I keep doing it anyway. Like the medication is working, but we have to meet I always say we have to meet the medication halfway and change our habits,
Yeah.
coping tools and things like that. So I think that's a good chunk of the people where naltrexone it's not working or it takes a lot longer to work, which in my view there's like no rush to extinction if someone, we want to make this change sustainable, but I think that's something that people have to be aware of, because even I kind of thought like, oh, this pill is going to fix everything, and a few months in I realized like, oh, there's more to it than just taking a pill before I drink, because this is a very complex habit that's ingrained in every area of my daily life, and I've got to figure out how I unwind after a stressful day, how I socialize with less alcohol or without being the life of the party and getting drunk and taking shots and all of that. So there's a lot that has to change in our life, in our environment as well, even with naltrexone. So
Yeah,
anything,
and I think
oh,
back
go
to
ahead. Sorry.
what you said earlier. I mean, I think if anything, it's more effective for somebody who's a real alcoholic than it is for somebody who's just drinking too much sometimes and wants to control it a little bit. I would think that person would have a hard time with compliance,
Interesting.
considering that they're not an alcoholic. I mean, when I went to my doctor, I knew more about the science than he did probably. But the only question he asked me was, "Do you have a genetic history of alcoholism?" And I said, "Yes." And he's like, "Good." I was like, "Why? Why is that good?" He's like, "Because I've had better success with those people than with the people that are just looking to cut back on drinking."
Interesting.
And I wasn't looking to quit. I mean, I was like, it would be amazing if I could just have these drinks, but I just lost the desire to do it, and it just sort of happened on its own. I mean, one day I was like, I don't think I want to do this anymore, and then a week later I was like, yeah, still want to drink, and it just kind of happened organically, which is amazing.
Wow, that's the same exact for me. I never intended to quit, but after year I was on the treatment for a year. It took me longer than you, but
But
yeah, I just kept going longer and longer without drinking. I was like, okay, I think I'm done. But
and,
it's
and since
interesting.
I'm sorry to interrupt you again,
No,
and
go
since
ahead.
I'm all about the numbers, right? So the Sinclair method has a 25% chance, I'd say, at least back when I looked at the numbers before, of total extinction and not drinking. And that's numbers still double the success rate of AA. So if you have somebody in your life who's telling you, no, you have to quit drinking. I'm not going to be okay with you drinking two, 3 drinks a night like you think you can do. The success rate on quitting drinking is still higher than the other methods.
That's interesting. See, I haven't looked at the data that specifically about going abstinent through the Sinclair method. Maybe we'll have to connect offline and you can point me to where you found that information. I'd be curious to check it out.
And I was looking up the relapse numbers for people in AA. Like,
Yeah.
what's your chance of relapsing after 5 years sober? They've got numbers. I found numbers for that.
Yeah.
I'll try and find them for you, but it looked like you had a 60, I can't remember, it was a 40% or a 60% chance of relapsing after 5 years
Wow.
sober in the program.
Wow.
And the numbers were much worse at 2, 3, 1 year. After 1 year, there was an 85%. Even after being sober for 1 year in AA, you had an 85% chance of relapsing.
Wow.
And they were,
And not,
and they kept telling me that a relapse was going to be death.
wow. And not to mention that like that relapse can happen, but the fact for me, I made it 6 months sober one time before TSM. That was the longest. And like you described, it's like that desire to drink is still there. And so not only are we fearing a relapse around the corner, it's like it's a daily battle just to not drink. And for me, it was really hard to live an authentic, joyful life when every day I was just like, don't drink, don't drink, don't drink. And that's what's
Yeah,
different for me with TSM. Like it doesn't occur to me to drink. It's just I have no desire. It doesn't I never think about it. And for me, that was like an opportunity to do anything else in life because my brain wasn't preoccupied with drinking anymore, which is so freeing.
absolutely.
Yeah. Gosh, it's been such a good conversation with you, Scott. Thank you so much for taking time to chat with me. Is there anything else you want to say before we wrap up the call?
No, I think I said it all. I was great talking to you. I loved all the questions, and hopefully I can help spread the word.
Yeah.
Because it's a counterintuitive thing. It's hard for people to wrap their mind around.
Yeah.
You know, the fact, like, you have to realize that the cravings are actually going to get worse when you stop drinking, even after all this time. That's counterintuitive, and then
Yeah.
it's counterintuitive that taking this pill and actually having a drink is going to help me drink better, or quit drinking. It's very counterintuitive,
I
and
know.
it's hard for people to understand. So hopefully we can just keep getting it out there, and we can get it a little more mainstream, so people aren't like just feeling like they're the only ones who know about this.
I know. It's like the majority of people don't know. Those of us who've had success with it, it's like we found the golden ticket. We need more
Yeah,
people to know. And yeah, it
yeah,
is counterintuitive, but alcoholism is not logical. And so, of course, using a treatment that's not logical as well to like, nip it in the bud, get it through the back door. Like there's just, it tricks us into falling out of love with alcohol.
right, exactly.
All right. Well, thank you so much for taking time. I hope you enjoy the rest of your day and I'll talk to you later.
All right, it was a pleasure. Bye.
Bye.